Robert Slater was Marilyn's friend for years. They spoke the Friday before she died, and she was angry.
She said, I'm going to hold a press conference and I'm going to blow the lid off of this whole damn thing.
What, in fact, did she know? Well, according to these FBI documents, Marilyn was considered a national security risk. And according to her diaries and conversations listened to by the FBI, she discussed nuclear issues with the president and his brother, the Attorney General. At a time when the world came closest to nuclear war, the Cuban Missile Crisis, her pillow talk with the Kennedys had put Marilyn in a very dangerous position.
I think that Sam Giancana was getting ready with his associate, Jimmy Hoffa. I think they were getting ready to blow the whistle on the relationship.
Bill Romer was an FBI agent in Chicago, and Sam Giancana was his #1 target. Now an author of books about his crime-fighting career, Romer recalls a prophetic confrontation with Giancana at Chicago's O'Hare Airport. He had stopped Giancana and his girlfriend, Phyllis McGuire, of the McGuire Sisters vocal group. McGuire was served a subpoena and taken for interrogation. Giancana was not pleased, and a screaming fight ensued.
He said to me, I suppose you're going to report this to your boss. And I said, who's my boss? He said, J. Edgar Hoover. And I said, yeah, I suppose J. Edgar Hoover will get a report of this. He said, and I suppose you're going to report it to your super boss. And I said, who's my super boss? He said, Robert Kennedy. And I said, well, yeah, as the Attorney General, he might get a copy. And he said, and I suppose you're going to report it to your super boss. And I said, well, who the hell is my super boss? And he said, John Kennedy. And I said, Sam Giancana, I said, the President of the United States is not interested in a punk like you. He's not interested in Sam Giancana. He said, Romer, he said, you'd be
surprised how interested John Kennedy is in Sam Giancana. I know one hell of a lot about Kennedy, and so does Phyllis McGuire. And one of these days, it's all going to come out.
I had no idea that there was any relationship with Marilyn Monroe. So that went right over my head at the time. But later, of course, when we picked up all the pieces, then it became quite apparent that he probably was referring to the situation concerning Marilyn Monroe.
This confrontation emerges as the pivotal scene on the path toward Marilyn's last day on Earth, a link supported by the Justice Department, according to Anthony Summers.
They believed that the mob had been involved in her death and that the whole thing had been an attempt to set up Robert Kennedy. That was what Justice Department officials were saying right back then. The whole thing hangs together.
Summers also cites the statements of former FBI Assistant Director Courtney Evans.
He said to me, yes, there was an attempt by organized crime to bring pressure on the Kennedys. And when I asked him to go into detail, he declined. He simply pointed me towards Sam Giancana.
And this man, veteran crime reporter Hank Mezek, also confirms a mob plot against Maryland's. There was a massive cover-up that began that night. According to a man originally involved in the bugging of Marilyn's house, Hollywood private investigator Fred Otash, Peter Lawford showed up at his office early that morning.
Saying that Marilyn Monroe's dead, Bobby Kennedy was there, that he was spirited out of town by some airplane back up north, that they had gotten in a big fight that evening, and that he'd like to have me make arrangements to have someone go out to the house and pick up any and all information that was possible regarding any involvement between Marilyn Monroe and the Kennedys.
For example, these confidential records show Marilyn calling Bobby repeatedly at the Justice Department, and the morning after Marilyn's death, RFK turned to an old rival to cover up.
He used J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, to get agents to pull the telephone records of what went on that evening, that officials everywhere were used to cover up for the Kennedys, and thus they escaped Sam Giancana's trap. You have Sam Giancana and his fellow mobsters more and more enraged by the behavior of the Kennedys, by what they saw as the persecution of the Kennedys, in cahoots with CIA officials, some of whom deeply resented the way in which the Kennedys were withdrawing from their confrontation with Fidel Castro, talking about new treaties with the Soviet Union, as some of those officials in the CIA saw it, going soft on the communists.
Author Summers then offers an extreme interpretation right out of Oliver Stone's controversial movie, JFK.
We have heard, not least in recent weeks, that the CIA and the mob may have worked together in the assassination of President Kennedy in Dealey Plaza, Dallas, in November 1963. On the basis of this latest information about the Marilyn Monroe death, there is no reason to exclude the possibility that what began in that little room in the suburb of Los Angeles ended in Dealey Plaza in November 1963.
What this means is that the death of Marilyn Monroe is no longer simply the sad demise of a Hollywood star, but takes on historical proportion. In a moment, here in Marilyn's bedroom, we will reconstruct a murder scene for her last night, the final word on Marilyn Monroe.